It was a winter night in a small Swiss village, the kind of night where the cold didn't just bite, it pressed against the windows like it wanted to get in. The wind rattled the shutters, moaned through the gaps in the old wood. Inside, the Jung family's house was warm but dim, smelling faintly of firewood and candle wax. 11-year-old Carl lay in bed under a heavy wool blanket, half asleep, listening to the sound of the rafters creaking. In those days, Carl still believed the world was layered. The top was daylight and chores and polite conversation. Beneath it were the stories his mother whispered about spirits and omens, about the things that watched you from the dark. He never said it out loud, but he was sure the old house had places no one had ever been. That night, the dream began. The house stood exactly as he knew it. Solid walls, thick beams, the smell of cooked potatoes still hanging in the air. But then the floor shifted. It didn't break. It opened, slowly, like a wound. In the middle of the room was a trap door he had never seen before. He knelt, pulled it open. A narrow staircase spiraled down into blackness. He put one foot on the first step. The air below was colder, damp, metallic. The stone was worn smooth, older than any building he had ever seen. Each step down made the light thinner until there was nothing left but the sound of his breathing. At the bottom was a corridor, too deep to belong to any real house, and at the end of it, a door, massive, black. The carvings on it looked older than language. It was breathing, slow, heavy, as if something on the other side was asleep but aware. He reached out. His fingers touched the cold metal, and he woke, upright in bed, lungs burning. The wind outside hadn't stopped, but now it sounded different. It carried the echo of that breath from below. He padded to the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under his bare feet. He poured a glass of water but didn't drink. Outside the small window, the night was thick and absolute. He whispered to the dark, "There's someone inside me, and one day he's going to speak." The next morning, he told no one, not his mother, not his father. Some things, even at 11, he knew were too strange to give away. But years later, in other dreams, different houses, different corridors, he would find that same black door waiting for him. And every time, it was breathing. Turn of the 20th century. Psychiatry was a cold, precise machine. Hospitals smelled of disinfectant and boiled linens, the air heavy with a quiet kind of defeat. In the tiled corridors, footsteps echoed too long. Behind the heavy doors, patients sat in rows on hard benches, staring into nothing, their hands clasped as if waiting for orders that would never come. In the consultation rooms, the language was mechanical. "Symptoms?" a doctor would ask without looking up from his notes. "Duration?" "Frequency?" The patient would mumble about sleepless nights, about a voice calling to them from the dark. The doctor's pen would scratch, "auditory hallucinations." The prescription would be sedation, or worse, isolation. Jung walked those corridors as a young doctor, feeling like he had stepped into a factory where human minds were stripped for parts. He watched colleagues speak about their patients as cases, not people, numbers on a chart, problems to be contained. No one asked why certain dreams kept coming back, or why the same fears haunted families across generations. No one wanted to touch the places where the rational map ended. The age itself demanded certainty. Science was marching forward. The invisible was for priests, the symbolic for fools. Myths belonged to dusty books, religion to Sunday sermons, and anything that smelled of the mystical was locked away with the delusional. The unspoken rule was clear. If you couldn't measure it, it wasn't real. But Jung saw something different. He looked at a patient's trembling hands and thought of storms. He listened to their stories and heard echoes older than their own lives. To him, a person wasn't a broken clock to be fixed. They were a skyscraper, bright windows at the top where the public could see, but deep beneath floor after floor in darkness, rooms no one had entered in centuries. Most doctors feared what might be down there. Jung didn't. He wanted to see it. He wanted to light a torch and keep going until there was no light left, and then go further. Vienna, 1907. The winter air cut through the streets, sharp with the smell of coal smoke and roasted coffee drifting from the cafes. Jung climbed the narrow, worn stairs to Freud's apartment, his breath visible in the dim light of the stairwell. He didn't know it yet, but the conversation about to begin would echo through the history of psychology. Freud opened the door, dark suit, intense eyes, a posture both welcoming and guarded. They shook hands, and in that instant, there was a silent recognition. Two men who both knew that the polite surface of the mind was just camouflage. The study was warm and heavy with the scent of pipe tobacco and old paper. The desk was stacked with notes, the shelves crowded with books and artifacts, Egyptian amulets, Greek statuettes, fragments of ancient tools. It felt less like a doctor's office and more like a private temple to the human psyche. They sat, Freud with his coffee, strong and black, Jung with tea, cooling in its cup, forgotten as soon as their talk began. They moved from topic to topic without pause, strange dreams, impossible coincidences, the compulsions that made no rational sense but refused to disappear. The hours stacked up without either of them noticing. Outside, the light drained from the sky, but inside the room, the air was alive with ideas. Freud spoke like a surgeon, precise and controlled, cutting each story until it fit neatly into his theory. Repression, sexual drives, nothing beyond. Jung listened intently, nodding, but part of him kept straying elsewhere, to the images he had seen in his own dreams, to the haunted look in patients' eyes when they described symbols that seemed older than their own lives. To him, these weren't just personal fantasies. They were fragments of something ancient, something shared. Later that night, back in his lodging, Jung wrote to a colleague, "I have met the man who has opened the door to the depths. I feel we speak a language the rest of the world has forgotten." And Freud, in his own letter, called Jung the crown prince of psychoanalysis. But even then, beneath the thrill of connection, there was a shadow of divergence. Sitting across from Freud, Jung thought, "You fear God, Sigmund. I don't." To Jung, the unconscious wasn't just an animal cage beneath the mind. It was a cathedral older than civilization, with pillars built from symbols no one had yet deciphered. And he knew, though neither of them would admit it that night, that one day this difference would split them apart. They sat across from each other in a quiet Vienna cafe, the kind where the clink of cups seemed louder than voices. Snow was beginning to fall outside, blurring the view through the window. For years their meetings had been a current of ideas that never ran dry, but this time there was a pause before the first word, a faint static in the air. Jung had felt it in their last few conversations, Freud's tone tightening whenever he strayed from the well-worn path of sexual theory, the subtle flicker of disapproval in his mentor's eyes. Freud leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind used when setting the rules. "The sexual theory is the foundation. It is the only truth. We must defend it at all costs." It wasn't a proposal. It was an order, a line in the sand. Jung's fingers tightened around his cup. He watched the thin spiral of steam rise, his mind flickering through years of work together, letters, discoveries, the feeling of having found a rare ally. And yet, there was the other truth he could no longer keep sealed. He thought of the dreams, the visions, the recurring symbols in patients who had never met, and of the feeling, half terrifying, half holy, that there was something in the human mind older than desire itself. He raised his eyes to Freud. "Not everything in us is lust, Sigmund. There are archetypes. There is darkness that isn't sexual. It's sacred." The words fell between them like a blade. Freud's face barely moved, but his eyes changed, hardening, withdrawing. To him, this wasn't disagreement. It was betrayal. The air between them was suddenly cold, as if the door to the cafe had swung open in winter. They both stood almost in unison. Chairs scraped against the floorboards. No handshake, no polite farewell. Just the tremor in their hands, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this was the end of something rare. Within days, whispers began in professional circles. Letters slowed, then stopped. In private gatherings, Freud's allies spoke of Jung as drifting into mysticism, losing the discipline of science. Invitations vanished. It was as if an invisible door had closed behind him. They walked out that night in opposite directions, snow falling between them. Neither looked back, and they would never share another coffee again. It was 1913, and the air in Europe felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. The streets were full of political tension, but Jung's own storm was coming from somewhere deeper. That winter, the dream arrived. He was standing on a high plain under a sky the color of iron. The horizon darkened, not with clouds, but with something heavier. A low growing roar rolled toward him. Then he saw it. A wall of red water, impossibly tall, racing forward. It swallowed fields, villages, cities, as if they were nothing. This was not a flood. It was an ocean of blood, stretching farther than the eye could see. In the water, faces appeared for a moment. Some he recognized, some strangers, before vanishing into the current. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound still echoing in his ears. The next night, it returned, and the next. Sometimes the wave came from the west. Sometimes it rose directly beneath his feet. But it always ended the same way. He was alone. The world drowned in crimson, and first he told no one. Then came the fear, not of the dream itself, but of what it might mean. Was it a vision? A symptom? Both? He knew too well the signs his colleagues would see. Hallucinations, delusions, the onset of madness. And yet, a part of him wanted to see more. He canceled his lectures, closed his practice, sat at his desk with a thick notebook and wrote one line across the first page. I will go down, even if it means losing my mind. From then on, his behavior began to look strange, even to those closest to him. Neighbors saw him walking into the forest alone, sometimes for hours. He would stop beside certain boulders, standing in complete silence, as if listening for something only he could hear. He traced strange shapes in the dirt, carved symbols into pieces of wood. Emma, his wife, tried to understand, but her worry was plain. Carl, she told him one evening, you're somewhere else, even when you're here. He didn't answer, because she was right. He was somewhere else, and he intended to keep going. In the village, whispers grew. Some said he had burned out, the great doctor undone by his own mind. Others claimed he had fallen into some ancient, dangerous practice. But no one could say for certain. All they knew was that Carl Jung was heading into a place most people couldn't imagine, and he had no intention of returning as the same man. At night, his study glowed dimly under the flicker of a single oil lamp. Outside, the world was silent, but inside Jung's mind there was movement, footsteps, whispers, doors opening where there were no doors. The visions no longer drifted in like half-formed dreams. They arrived fully, like guests crossing a threshold, bringing the cold of the outside world with them. The first to appear was the shadow. Not a fairy tale monster, but a presence so familiar, it felt like looking into a mirror that showed the parts he tried to keep hidden. Rage, envy, cruelty, the hunger for control. It sat across from him at the table, hands folded, saying nothing, its gaze unblinking. Why are you here? Jung asked. To remind you, the shadow said, that I am you, and you are me. Then came the old man, a figure with a face like weathered stone and eyes that seemed older than the earth. His voice was slow, deliberate, and carried the weight of something absolute. What you reject will control you. Face it. Name it, or it will own you. Jung felt the words settle in the room like dust, impossible to sweep away. He pulled a large red leather-bound book toward him, dipped his pen into crimson ink, and began to write. The first lines came as if dictated, not thoughts, but commands. Symbols rose from the page, spirals that felt like they could pull you inward, towers with windows like watchful eyes, serpents curled into themselves, circles within circles. Figures appeared too. A black-winged bird with a human gaze, a crowned woman holding a cup filled with fire, a child with a halo made of thorns. Each image seemed to hum with meaning he could sense, but not yet translate. As the book filled, he felt changes within himself, not like gaining knowledge, but like remembering something buried. Some nights he felt stronger, as if new rooms had opened inside him. Other nights he felt raw, exposed, as if the shadow had stripped away parts of him he had thought were permanent. He never tried to drive it away. Instead, he pulled up a chair for it. Night after night, they sat together, the shadow, the old man, and Jung, speaking in a language that wasn't quite words. Somewhere deep down, he understood. This, more than any lecture or theory, was the real work. And it was changing him in ways he would never be able to reverse. He began to see the pattern everywhere. In dreams, in myths, in the unguarded sentences people let slip when they spoke about their fears. It wasn't random. It wasn't just personal history. These were shapes in the human mind that had existed long before any of them were born. He called them archetypes, the shadow, carrying everything you refuse to face. The anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine that shaped how you loved and how you hated. The self, the quiet center holding all of it together. They weren't inventions. They were blueprints, passed down through centuries, older than any religion, older than any spoken word. Jung saw it in the young soldier who came to him after the war, unable to sleep because of a recurring dream. In it, he was chased by a faceless figure through endless streets. When Jung pressed him, the soldier admitted that the figure felt like me, but the part I'd kill if I could. That was the shadow, pure and unfiltered. He saw it in a wealthy widow, who kept falling in love with men who destroyed her life. Different faces, same pattern. In her journals, Jung pointed out a male figure that appeared in her dreams, beautiful but cruel. That, he told her, is your animus. Until you recognize him, you will keep marrying him. She stared at him as if he had just read her soul like an open book. Even in the culture around him, Jung could trace the same patterns. In the new cinema, in pulp novels, in political speeches, heroes, villains, wise elders, shadowy tricksters. The same characters dressed in different clothes, playing out the same ancient dramas. In lectures, he didn't soften the message. The goal, he told his students, is not to be good. The goal is to be whole. Morality without self-awareness, he said, was just a costume. Real integration meant dragging the hidden parts of yourself into the light, no matter how much they made you flinch. And he warned them, again and again. The most dangerous people were the ones convinced. They had no darkness at all. They were the ones who acted it out in the world without ever realizing it was their own reflection. He was married to Emma, the woman who had stood beside him through his rise, his break with Freud, and his long nights of descent into the unconscious. She managed the household, raised their children, and quietly held together the parts of his life that would have fallen apart without her. And then there was Tony Wolfe, a former patient whose sharp mind and intuitive grasp of symbols made her more than a colleague. Over the years, she became a constant presence. She attended his lectures, worked beside him in his study, and eventually shared his private life. It wasn't hidden. Tony would join the family at the table for dinner. She and Emma sometimes sat side by side, discussing his latest theories, the two women bound by a strange, unspoken agreement. On summer evenings in Kusnacht, they would all sit in the garden together, the clink of glasses and the smell of wine in the air, talking about myths, dreams, and the human soul until the candles burned low. From the outside, it looked like scandal in slow motion. Neighbors whispered, colleagues judged. A few dismissed his entire body of work as the indulgences of a man who couldn't control his personal life. Some wrote to him directly, urging him to protect his reputation. Others simply stopped inviting him. Jung wasn't immune to the strain. There were nights he lay awake, torn between the comfort of Emma's loyalty and the intellectual and emotional spark he found in Tony. He felt guilt and freedom in equal measure, and the weight of living in a way most people would never accept. But he refused to arrange his life to fit the world's comfort. For him, betraying his inner truth would have been a deeper sin than breaking social norms. A man who cuts off a part of himself, he once said, to please others, loses the very thing they were drawn to in the first place. He didn't pretend to be a saint. He didn't smooth the edges of his story for public approval. He lived by the same principle he taught. Acknowledge every part of yourself, even the ones that don't fit the story people want to hear. It made him complicated. It made him human. And it made the price of his work something he paid, quietly but constantly, in his own life. World War II spread across Europe like a fever that wouldn't break. Jung watched it, not with surprise, but with the cold recognition of someone who had already seen it, in dreams, years before. The faces in the streets matched the ones that had stared at him from the red tide in his visions. Crowds marched in perfect lines, their chants rolling like drumbeats through the air. The words sounded like conviction, but when Jung looked closely, he saw nothing behind them, only the trance he knew too well from his patients, the surrender of the self to something older, darker, and hungrier. In his diary from 1936, he wrote, "The dictator's voice is not his own. He is the mouthpiece of the collective shadow, and the people listen because it speaks with their own repressed will." In a lecture in Zurich, he warned, "A mass without a myth is prey to a demon. Give them no guiding story, and they will invent one, born from fear, fed by blood." In his consulting room, the war's shadow walked in with his patients. A young German officer, home on leave, told him of dreams where he stood in a black forest, a giant figure made of smoke pointing him toward a burning city. A Swiss factory owner confessed he felt a strange euphoria whenever he saw soldiers march, though he swore he hated the politics. Jung saw it in their eyes, the same dilation, the same fever, no different from the crowds. He watched the speeches on film. The leaders' movements were ritualistic, their voices bypassing logic and going straight to the gut. "They are not following a policy," Jung wrote. "They are following an archetype. It has worn many masks, Caesar, the prophet, the Messiah, but its hunger is always the same." Looking back now, the grainy black and white footage feels dangerously familiar. Replace the banners with hashtags, the rallies with online mobs, the loudspeakers with viral videos, and the trance is identical. The same surrender to the shadow, the same intoxication with belonging. It wasn't just history. It was a part of the human mind that never left, waiting for another chance to take the stage. On the quiet shore of Lake Zurich, Jung built his refuge. It began as a small idea, a place to think, away from lectures, patients, and the noise of the world. But as the first stones were laid, it became something else. He built it slowly, by hand, season after season. Each stone was chosen deliberately. The base stones were rough and unshaped, pulled straight from the earth, the foundation of the unconscious, he told visitors. Higher up, He used stones smoothed by water and wind, the layers of experience worn into form. The windows were narrow, like arrow slits, framing small pieces of the outside world, reminders that the view of life was always partial. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and stone dust. The walls were lined with shelves of books, but here and there he carved directly into the plaster. Spirals, mandalas, symbols from his dreams. On the floor, he painted a great circle divided into 4 quadrants, the compass of the self. He spent days there alone, chopping wood in the morning, writing until his hand cramped, painting when words failed him. The tower was more than a home. It was a physical diagram of his mind, grounded, layered, rooted deep, and open to the sky. Then one day, his heart stopped. No warning, no gentle fade, just silence. He felt himself pulled away in an instant, as if the cord between him and the world had been cut. Suddenly, he was standing beneath an endless blue sky, more vivid than any sky on earth. The air was impossibly clear. In the distance, on a hill of radiant green, a golden temple shimmered as though made of sunlight itself. It was silent, but not empty. He could feel the presence of something waiting. The pull toward it was magnetic. He took a step forward, and with it came a deep calm. Here there was no pain, no weight, no unfinished sentences. The temple was the end of every question he had ever asked. He knew that if he kept walking, he would never return. And yet, in that silence, he thought of his tower. The pages left unwritten, the ideas that had not yet found form, the patients still searching for their own maps. There was work undone. He turned away from the light. The next thing he knew, he was lying in his bed, lungs aching as breath returned. The tower stood where it always had. The lake still lapped against the shore. He understood now. The temple would wait. The work would not. Until it was finished, he would stay. We say shadow and mean the parts of ourselves we hide. We say archetype when we talk about universal patterns in stories and people. We call someone an introvert or extrovert, as if those words had always existed. They hadn't. They were his words, his ideas, slipped quietly into everyday language until no one remembered where they came from. Jung didn't just write theories. He rewired the way people thought about themselves. He gave names to things most of us had only felt. He built a vocabulary for the inner world, a set of tools that escaped the walls of psychology and spread into culture, art, and casual conversation. You didn't need to read his books to live in the world he helped shape. A film director building a hero's journey is following his map of archetypes. A novelist creating a trickster or wise elder is drawing from his catalog. A life coach guiding a client through shadow work is, knowingly or not, borrowing his method. A young woman in New York, journaling about why she keeps sabotaging her own relationships, is doing the same kind of self-inquiry he pioneered. A soldier in therapy for PTSD is guided to meet his shadow, rather than suppress it, straight from Jung's playbook. A startup founder, in a workshop about leadership, learns that her recurring dreams of falling are part of a deeper archetypal pattern, something Jung wrote about nearly a century ago. Therapists still use his concepts, sometimes without citing him. Writers and screenwriters mine his work to craft characters and worlds that feel timeless. Even the structure of some of the most successful movies and novels follows the symbolic arcs he mapped out. His influence runs like roots under the surface, quiet, invisible, but impossible to pull out. Decades after his death, the fire is still burning. Every time someone stops to look inward and tries to see the pattern behind their choices, they're walking a path he drew. Even if they've never heard his name, they're moving through a landscape he designed, with signposts written in a language he taught the world to speak. Jung never pretended the journey inward was safe. He told anyone who would listen, The thing you're most afraid to face is the thing already steering your life. He'd once worked with a successful businessman who was terrified of being alone. Every decision, every partnership, every late-night meeting was driven by that fear, though he never admitted it. Jung pressed him to name it, to look it in the eye. "You're not afraid of failure," Jung told him. "You're afraid of meeting yourself." When the man finally said it out loud, his life began to change. Not because the fear vanished, but because it stopped driving from the shadows. Jung believed the answers people searched for in books, gurus, or quick fixes were usually in the place they least wanted to look, deep in their own basement. Not the clean, well-lit upper floors where we keep our curated selves, but the locked rooms where the air feels heavy and the light doesn't reach. He told the story of a woman haunted by recurring nightmares, of a dark hallway. She spent years trying to dream of something else, until Jung convinced her to walk down it. At the end, she found a room full of childhood drawings she had forgotten. The hallway stopped appearing, and the goal wasn't sainthood. It wasn't being good by someone else's definition. It was wholeness. He described it to one student this way: "If you only live from the light, you are half a person. If you only live from the dark, you are half a person. The work is to carry both without lying about either." To Jung, everything else, titles, reputation, the illusion of having it together, was just noise. He'd seen people win accolades, fortunes, and the admiration of millions, only to sit in his office unable to answer the simplest question: who are you when no one is watching? For him, facing the truth about yourself wasn't self-indulgence. It was survival. It was the only way to stop living on autopilot, and the only way to live a life that was actually yours, right now. Stop. The room around you is quiet, but inside your head there's movement, a voice. Maybe it sounds like you. Maybe it's softer. Maybe it's sharper. Jung would tell you to pause here, before you answer, before you scroll, before you let it slip away. Ask yourself, who is actually speaking? Is it the part of you that knows what you want, or the part that's been repeating someone else's lines for years? Is it you, or is it the shadow you've been pretending isn't there? Don't answer too quickly. Let the question hang. Let it feel uncomfortable. If you don't know, then you have work to do, and that work doesn't happen here in the light, where everything is clean and easy to explain. It's down there, in the places you've been avoiding, the corners where the air is heavier, where you can't quite see the floor. You won't like what you find at first. It will feel dangerous. It will feel wrong. But it's yours. Go down anyway, past the excuses, past the polished mask you keep for the world, past the doors you've kept locked for so long, you've forgotten why. And when you finally get there, when the dark closes in and the voice speaks again, ask it one last question. If I am not you, then who am I? The answer will not come quickly, but it will come. And when it does, you'll know you've been hearing it all your life.